Hello YouTube modeling community. This is to answer Chris Donatone's question to all of us. How did we get started in scale modeling? So I started scale modeling at a very early age. My parents wanted me to be a bookworm and wanted me to basically spend all my time with schoolwork. So I stayed at home quite a bit, didn't really go out much. Wanted to do Little League, Boy Scouts, things like that, but mostly it was just, I had my bicycle to go out sometimes, but mostly I stayed home and they wanted me to study a lot. So scale modeling actually was right for me because you do it at home. You don't really need to go out much. And the way I got into it was my parents had a family-run store, and our house was 2 blocks away. And every day, on the way to and from the store, we used to pass by our local candy store. It was one of those typical candy stores in the 70s that they had in the 5 boroughs of New York City. It had the generic green-colored Breyers sign that said stationery, luncheonette, candy store. It was always green, and I think maybe Breyers ice cream sponsored it or something, but that's what it used to say on the top sign. And when you go inside, unlike convenience stores nowadays, it basically sold a little bit of everything, and it had wooden shelves on it. So you would go in there for your soda, ice cream, pre-packaged ice cream where you can have them scoop it on an ice cream cone for you, magazines, baseball cards, pixie sticks, candy bars, a few novels. Basically it was a store that sold a little bit of everything, which I guess was correct for the time period back then, but now all stores are specialized. To buy a box of baseball cards you have to go to a sports memorabilia place, but back then they sold a little bit of everything. And I remember passing by the window, and he had in the window, and I remember this very well, it was a 132 scale 1911 Rolls Royce by MPC. It was a 2-in-1. You can build it with the wooden spokes as stock, or you can build it as a custom with slicks, a dragster type. And I remember it even came with a little driver too that was period correct. Like, he looked like a English driver with the little driving cap, and he had the mustache too. Unfortunately, I don't have that model anymore. It was a true glue bomb because it was my first model kit. But that kind of got me hooked into it. And then I don't remember what my second or third kit was. Maybe I do, but I would have to say along the line, if you guys went to school, sometimes they would have candy drives where you would receive certain prizes for selling a certain amount of boxes of candy, and of course the more boxes you sold, the better the prizes were. So if you sold like 1 box of candy, you would get like this cheap plastic keychain or something. But I remember I had to sell 30 or 35 to get a Fujimi A8 Crusader jet. It was 172 scale, and that might have been my second or third, but it came soon after the MPC, so I was probably like in 4th or 5th grade. But when I got that MPC, I think the 1911 Rolls Royce, I was probably around 7 or 8. And I remember the guy at the candy store, Pat's Candy Store, he actually, without asking, he would also sell you the tube of glue for 10 cents or 25 cents, whatever it was. It wasn't Tester, it was another brand. I forgot what brand it was. It was yellow and orange. But you needed the model cement, and I built the 1911 Rolls Royce. And then after that, in the candy drive, I remember I had to really push to sell 30 or 35 boxes, and then I got the Fujimi Crusader jet. That one, I think I still used whatever glue was left over in the tube. But then once the tube ran out, there was no hobby shop, or the candy store stopped selling it, so I had to actually use Elmer's glue. So I do have some model kits that I put together with Elmer's glue, so I will show you how that came out, because it is something different. But when you're that young, you make do with what you have. So it was the Rolls Royce, the Crusader jet, and then I think soon after that, cost and scale size was always important to me because my parents really did not want me building models. They wanted me to spend my whole time just reading, on schoolwork, and as you know, you can't really do that 100% of the time. You need some kind of extracurricular activities or an outlet. So I used to have to buy very small scale models and hide them from my parents. So I liked military in the beginning, so I built a lot of 172 scale airplanes and military, like tanks, half tracks. I still remember them, Hasegawa 172 scale half tracks. And I remember I didn't really start out having a full paint set either. I used the oil-based paints left over from the color by number sets, so they would stick, but then after a while, when they dried and you handled them, they would just come off. But back then, I didn't know. I mean, no one taught me. I just learned on my own. I didn't really read too many newsletters or publications, so I learned everything on my own, so it took a very long time. I had a very large learning curve. I would have to say maybe 10 to 20 kits in is then when I started picking up a little bit of experience, like black washing, that's a very common trick, but I didn't know about it. I didn't read magazines and publications until I did it myself. Whitewashing, things like that, dry brushing. So after the 172 scale planes and all that, I got into tanks because I really did like military in the beginning. So I built a lot of tanks. And then in between there, I also started developing an interest for cars because my dad had a 64 Chevy Bel Air, and I always wished that he had like a two-door Super Sport Impala with the 409 dual quads. But it was just, a practical four-door sedan. And I remember seeing someone else's car, because in the city, people just park underneath the highway on the side of the street and they just work on their cars, whether they have to drop the starter out and replace it. I remember he had a 64 Chevy Impala two-door. It wasn't in great shape, but I kind of started to appreciate the 64 Chevys. And then I remember going to a hardware store and they had an AMT countdown series of a 1964 Chevy Impala. I mean, the mold is really old. But I remember the countdown series because it had all the years on the boxes, like would have like 60, 61, 62, 63, 64. So I started building that kit and I started learning about how cars were put together, or basically some of the integral parts, and that kind of generated an interest for me as far as working on cars, and that's how I started to get an interest in cars. And then I started working on my dad's car, and it was an old style car, so I remember doing the tune-ups myself, gapping the spark plugs, the dwell of the points, the adjusting the advance or retarding of the firing sequence with the timing gun, rotating the distributor cap and stuff like that. So it generated an interest. So model building actually, is basically a smaller scale intro to a lot of things that you would have an interest in. And then much further down the line, I built my first AMT truck. It was the one that they sell now, the Kenworth. Was it the 925 conventional? And after building that kit, I kind of understood what all the parts in the truck were, because that kit is pretty detailed. It has a lot of parts, unlike the Revell cheaper ones. This kit, it described to you what each and every single part was. So that's how I got into model building. After a while, I started having an appreciation for different types of models and things like that. I really like the motorized kits that they no longer make. Well, they make one or two. I think they make a Panther and a Sherman. But back in the 70s, I tried to catch up and build all the motorized Tamiya tank kits that were offered during the 1960s and possibly the 50s. The ones where even now, without the motor, you would see the hole in the hull. So that's pretty much it. Eventually, when I pull out my 172 scale, I'll show you guys how I used to glue the kits together with Elmer's glue. It would leave like a nice white or clear bead. And the cure time was long, 30 minutes long pretty much. so that's pretty much it. I did take a break from model building right after I got married, and then I went through a difficult time and all that because we bought a house, and then also my parents started getting sick, and they actually both eventually passed away from cancer. So again, I just want to take this opportunity to say that my heart goes out to Rick Zink and Andrew Aries for their loss. I know how it feels. My parents died within a year of each other. Cancer is kind of strange. It's almost like things they couldn't explain, some abnormal cell growth or developments they say is on cancer. So I did want to take the time out to say that my heart goes out to them and sorry for their loss to both Rick and Andrew. And that's pretty much it. So hopefully, we'll. Some of you may have the same experience I had as far as how you got to scale modeling, but that's my experience. That's why no matter how bad NPC kits are, they are more challenging as far as fit, but I remember my first kit was an NPC. And I remember making like really bad rookie mistakes with following the instructions. So for example, that a Crusader kit, I didn't really know how to read instructions. So if the instructions had the landing gear doors on top of the wing and it had a little black dotted arrow that said it goes here, I didn't know how to read the arrow, so basically I used to glue the landing gear flap right onto the wing, because on the instruction sheets that's where it was, but it's not. It had a black arrow that said you have to put it right next to the landing gear, but I didn't know that. And also another funny mistake I made, I remember now, was, how on some instruction sheets it was the Aurora Sopwith Camel, which I wish I didn't throw out, but it was a rather large scale because World War I aircraft are not that big. I would say it's 132 scale, maybe 128 scale. It was rather a large scale, but the airplane came out the same size as 172 scale because they're so small. They drew the outline of the aircraft from a top view, and then they split the model in the middle down, and they said top view and bottom view. And so for example, the top view would be camouflage and the bottom view would be like tan. I didn't know how to read the instructions, so I remember painting my model with the bottom exactly in half, exactly like the way they drew it out in the instruction sheet. So half let's say the left side would be camouflage and the right side would be like tan. But that's not what they meant. They meant top view and bottom view, but I didn't know that. So it's just interesting looking back at some of my model kits, some of the mistakes I made and everything. Even now I'm constantly learning. I just started wiring cars, and I'm not going to go back and install distributed caps with wires on my car, but just an interesting process. You start learning about polishing and all that stuff, so it's just a never-ending process. But I enjoy model building. It's kind of like relaxation. You forget about the things in your life as you enjoy your model. Same reason why people probably have projects, or they do reading or sewing. For the time being that you're doing models, you forget about some of the problems or just escape from reality. So that's why I still assemble them. So hopefully it wasn't too long. Hopefully I included some interesting information. So and thanks again, Chris, for posing the question. Sorry it took so long. I had a busy week and I was away for the weekend. So all right, that's it for now. See you guys soon.